This is BBC News, the headlines. President Biden has told fellow G7 leaders that there's an added risk to keeping US troops in Afghanistan beyond the August the 31st deadline. He said there was an increasing threat of terrorist acts from the local Islamic State affiliate. The Taliban say nationals may no longer travel to Kabul airport, citing the chaotic situation there. They also urged the Americans not to entice Afghan nationals to emigrate, saying their professional expertise would be sorely needed. Charlie Watts, the drummer with the Rolling Stones, has died aged 80. He was acclaimed as one of the greatest drummers of his generation. Beatles drummer Ringo Starr tweeted, "We're going to miss you, man." And the 2020 Paralympic Games have opened in a ceremony in a nearly empty stadium in Tokyo. Hello, welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me, Sonia Soda, chief leader writer at The Observer, and Ali Maraja, columnist for The Article. Right then, before we say hello to those two, let's start with the front pages. The Guardian, one of a number of papers to feature striking pictures there of the Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts, who died today. The paper's main story, though, is about that Britain's evacuation from Kabul, expected to end within 24 to 36 hours. According to the Daily Mail, Britain effectively has just hours to fly thousands of Afghans out of Kabul. And the Eye says panicked Afghans are being banned from fleeing their country as the Taliban orders women to stay at home in order to prevent ill treatment. The Daily Telegraph says Joe Biden rejected calls to delay his August the 31st exit date during a virtual G7 meeting this afternoon. And the Metro says the president snubbed Boris Johnson's pleas to keep some troops in the country. While the Financial Times says Joe Biden's decision caps days of uncertainty and comes despite growing concerns over security around Kabul airport. And the Sun concentrates on the death of Charlie Watts, calling him the rock behind the Stones. Right, let's get started. Good evening to you both.
Evening.
Evening.
Right, we're going to start. Obviously, Afghanistan is the main story dominating the main headlines. We're going to start with the Daily Telegraph. And the headline there is Biden refuses to extend deadline. Speculation about this August the 31st deadline all day, and then confirmation now that he isn't aiming to extend it. Sonia, should we start with you?
Yes, I think this is really terrible news for people who are still stuck in Afghanistan, whether that's kind of US, UK, other nationals who aren't from Afghanistan, who are hoping to get out, or whether it's people living in Afghanistan, judges, activists who are at risk, serious risk from the Taliban. And this is something that the UK, Boris Johnson, has been putting real pressure on Joe Biden to apply pressure to the Taliban to give the US longer to stay in, to secure the airport, to help get people out. But the US today has made clear that they're not going to be doing that. And I think that it's incredibly troubling news, really, because even though evacuation has been proceeding apace, we've all seen those terrible images from the airport in Kabul. 20,000 people camping outside in the most terrible of conditions, desperate to get out. And it does seem, that if you sort of speak to people in the UK, that if this deadline is imposed by the Taliban, British nationals will be left there, people from Afghanistan who are at serious risk from the Taliban will be left trapped there, including those who've helped and assisted and worked for the British Embassy and British forces. So it's really quite a terrible state of affairs. And, we've already seen the Taliban today say to Afghans, don't try and get out, stay here. If you're a skilled Afghan, you mustn't leave. But these are people who we know are at risk from the Taliban. So I think it's just really troubling news, and it contributes to the sense that this is just an absolute foreign policy disaster for the US and the UK. Well,
let's pick up on that US-UK relationship, Ali. Some of the front pages, not so much the Telegraph to be fair, but some of the others framing this as, you know, a Joe Biden snubs Boris Johnson, effectively the requests of not just Boris Johnson, other G7 leaders to extend this deadline has essentially been ignored by the US.
Well, I think the reality is that Joe Biden is stuck between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla being the G7 leaders on the one hand and Charybdis being the Taliban. I mean, the time for the US being able to dictate the timetable for this withdrawal is now past. They could have done this by keeping Bagram Air Base open, getting everyone out in good time, and then withdrawing their troops. They didn't do that. They chose to do it the other way, whereby withdrawing troops first. So that's why they're in the mess that they're in. And I think that it shows the decline of US hegemony now, which has been dominating geopolitics since 1989, since the collapse of the Berlin Wall till 2007-8. That's now declining. And it just shows that the G7, obviously Boris Johnson convened this meeting because he's got the chairmanship of the G7. But it's really NATO who Biden has snubbed here, because it was NATO, after all, following the collapse of the Twin Towers back in 2001, that invoked Article 5 and did go in shoulder to shoulder with the US to sacrifice blood and treasure in this pursuit. So Sonia is right. It is woeful. It is shameful. It is very bad. But unfortunately, the Taliban have been very clear that any extension beyond the 31st of August will be regarded as a violation. Now, we know that William Burns, the head of the CIA, has been having a meeting, or had a meeting yesterday with Abdul Ghani Baradar, the co-head of the Taliban. We don't know really what happened in those discussions, but it seems that the Taliban has got no mood to extend, and they are now in the ascendancy. So you've got an issue here where there's a potential drought going on and all these issues happening. People can't get out.
OK, Ali, Sonia, both stand by for a second, because I just want to bring you what Joe Biden's been saying. So he's been speaking in the last hour or so, giving an address at the White House about Afghanistan, obviously, and the discussions he's had with other G7 nations. Let's take a listen.
There was strong agreement among the leaders about the evacuation mission underway, as well as the need to coordinate our approach to Afghanistan as we move forward. First, on evacuation, we agreed that we will continue to close cooperation to get people out as efficiently and safely as possible. We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops, but the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who were transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable should that become necessary. I'm determined to ensure that we complete our mission, this mission. I'm also mindful of the increasing risks that I've been briefed on, and the need to factor those risks in. They're real and significant challenges that we also have to take into consideration. The longer we stay, starting with the acute and growing risk of an attack by a terrorist group known as ISIS-K, an ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, which is a sworn enemy of the Taliban as well. Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians. Additionally, thus far, the Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation. We're already had some gunfighting break out. We run a serious risk of it breaking down as time goes on. Second, the G7 leaders and the leaders of the EU, NATO, and the UN all agreed that we will stand united in our approach to the Taliban. We agreed the legitimacy of any future government depends on the approach it now takes to uphold international obligations, including to prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for terrorism.
So, Sonia, Ali, Joe Biden, they're confirming lots of what you were both saying, lots of what's on the front pages of the papers. And before we leave Afghanistan, just want to very quickly, Sonia, if that's OK, I want to go to the front page of The Guardian, because they have a slightly different line. They're calling an exclusive, Dan Saber, Peter Walker, Aubrey Allegretti, UK troops to leave Kabul within 24 to 36 hours, they say.
Yeah, so these are reports that actually, if the US is leaving by the 31st of August, the UK is actually expected to leave a little ahead of the US. Actually, perhaps, even sooner, according to this Guardian report. And I'm sure that will be to do with concerns about security of British troops. But I think this really does raise very serious questions. 24 to 36 hours isn't long at all. And this is where the fears that British nationals, that people who work for the British government will remain trapped in Afghanistan. This is where they're coming from. And we saw today the Taliban, advising women to stay at home. It's a really, 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 really grim situation, I think.
Yeah.
I think for people living in Afghanistan, hearing about the US pull out, hearing about the imminent UK pull out, I just can't imagine how people must be feeling on the ground.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that deadline to see if that does come to pass. Right, we're going to move away from Afghanistan and go to the front page of the Daily Telegraph again, but actually looking at the story below their main picture, below their main story. The headline, COVID disruption is translating into deaths from other causes. Ali, tell us about this. This is a reminder that COVID isn't just dangerous because of COVID.
That's right. The monthly death rate is actually increased compared to prior years. And this is basically showing that, as we expected, diabetes, heart disease, several other serious issues that people have not been tackled because of COVID-19 has really taken up all the resources in the NHS over the past 16 or 17 months. And we know that when Sajid Javid came into his new post as Health Secretary a few weeks ago, the biggest issue that he's got to tackle is the 5 million backlog on the waiting list, which we understand could rise to 13 million in the coming months, which is really quite shocking and extremely worrying. So this is, again, goes to show that it has had a huge impact. And if people do need treatment, they should make an effort to prioritize that urgently so that they get the treatment that they need as quickly as possible.
Absolutely right. OK, let's take a look at the Financial Times now, a story on their front page. OnlyFans founder says, quote, unfair. Banks gave him no choice but to ban porn. Sonia, I'm going to leave you with the delicate task of explaining this story to us.
Sure. So this is about a fan site, OnlyFans, which has actually become best known for sort of porn and sex workers kind of selling content to their fans. It's made the site a lot of money, especially that's grown quite a lot during the pandemic. But in recent days, OnlyFans has announced that it would no longer be hosting porn. It said that sort of nude images are OK, but it has to be in line with the site's policy. And this has prompted a big backlash from people who make their money by selling porn on the website. I think the thing that has to be said, though, is that like other sites and other social media platforms, OnlyFans has not been doing a good job of stopping the exploitation of vulnerable women and particularly the sex exploitation of children. And it was a BBC investigation earlier this year, back in May, that revealed that it was hosting sexual content from children and that the site had not done enough to take this down. And so I think as a result of the reputational damage, banks have sort of said to OnlyFans, and because OnlyFans sort of charges people to view it, it's kind of easier for banks to say with them, well, we're just not going to support payment for this sort of content. So this is what the OnlyFans kind of founder is protesting about. But I would say, well, I'm sorry, but if you're hosting exploitative content, particularly exploitative content of underage children, there should be consequences. There haven't been enough consequences for lots of sites, like, lots of porn sites like Pornhub, for example. It seems that OnlyFans is one of the first sites to sort of face these sorts of consequences, and it's a result of banks and payment. And I'm sorry, but there has to be consequences for this stuff.
Ali, interesting that I think most people agree if there is exploitation, and certainly where there is, there should be consequences. Some people will have issue with the role that it's suddenly the banks making that call.
Well, indeed, and I heard there were a number of sex workers that have been on the media today saying that this has actually prevented them from a very lucrative and helpful income stream when they haven't been able to get to work during the pandemic. So there are two sides to this story. Certainly, on the point that Sonia made, that's a very valid one. I just think that banks, in general, have got ESG, environmental social governance policies. It's top of the agenda right now. Being associated with a site that promulgates porn is not particularly helpful in terms of the image that they want to cultivate, these banks. So I can understand why they've decided to clamp down on this, and clearly it's causing some consternation amongst not only the users but also the content providers that have content's increased by 74% in the last year or so. So clearly there's a demand for it, but I can see where the banks are coming from on this.
Yeah, there was a huge boom during the COVID lockdowns, wasn't there? Right, we will leave that story for the moment. Fascinating issue. We're going to go to the front page of the Metro, and actually we could have picked almost any paper front page here. Rolling Stone, Charlie dies at 80. The picture along the right-hand side there, and his face is on the front cover of most of the front pages. Sonia, what a life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a kind of rock legend, isn't he? So very sad news this evening. What he had to pull out of a Rolling Stones kind of reunion tour this month. It was said that he had a medical procedure, but I think this has come as a surprise to a lot of fans who kind of weren't expecting this news. So he is a total rock legend, and lots of the papers, as expected, are paying tribute to him.
Ali, a fan of his work?
Well, yeah, I think, look, he's dapper, he's unassuming, extremely talented drummer. I mean, I dabbled at the drums at school, and he was certainly someone who was really up there in the pantheon of drumming greats. But I think Curtis Stigers, the American singer, summed it up brilliantly today, thanking Charlie Watts for his huge contribution to the rock scene, and saying that Curtis Stigers' own parents conceived him to the sound of Satisfaction. So Curtis Stigers basically saying he actually owes his life to Charlie Watts, which I think really sums it up quite well.
That is a wonderful story that I have not heard before. I'm not sure I need to hear again. Sonia, I don't think you can top that with stories about the Rolling Stones, but they have such an incredible cultural legacy, don't they?
They do, absolutely, yeah.
Right, we're going to go on to the final story, and it's a fantastic image. This is from the sport. I mean, it just kind of speaks for itself. Let the games begin. This is the beginning of the Paralympics. It's from the back page there of the Independent. It's a wonderful image. Of course, we had the delayed Olympics, and now it's time for the Paralympics to get underway finally. Sonia.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was the opening ceremony today. We're going to have 2 weeks of competition and events now. I think after the year that we've all had, people took such joy in the Olympics, and everyone who I know got really into it. And one of the brilliant things about the Olympics is watching kind of random sports that you never knew you could get into. I think the Paralympics is just as good, if not better. Back in London 2012, I went to see some Paralympic events, including the wheelchair basketball. Just really, really exciting. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into some Paralympic sport over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, Ali, 2012 was probably a game-changing year when the Paralympics were here in the UK, certainly for the UK. The exposure, the crowds, absolutely huge. Sadly, no real crowds in the stadiums this time round, which is a bit of a shame.
It is a shame, and I remember back in 2012, the slogan was "Inspire a Generation," and I think that's exactly what it did. Look, it is very sad that there weren't the crowds that you expect at a Paralympic Games in the actual stadium, but nevertheless, the ceremony was spectacular, as you would expect from the Japanese. Really, really well put on, colourful, dynamic. And the Paralympics is very special. There are some great new sports, para badminton I'm looking forward to, para taekwondo. And we had a great medal haul in Rio with 147 medals. We see if we can top that. We've had a brilliant Olympics just a couple of weeks ago. So the Paralympians have really got to live up to that. So let's see. I'm really excited about it. I think it's great for sport. We need a lift. And I wish all our Paralympians, British Paralympians, the very best for the Games.
Ali, that's a message we can all get behind. And it's hearing from athletes, former athletes throughout the day today, they are quietly confident they can beat that medal haul, which would be a huge achievement if they do. Right, thank you both so much. Great to chat. We'll be back with you in an hour. For the moment, though, thank you. Right, that is the papers. Sonia and Ali will be back in just over half an hour to look at more of the stories that will be coming through on the front pages and the websites here. For now, though, thanks very much for your company. Bye-bye.